All right, welcome to the April 7th board workshop. Today, the topic du jour is going to be budget. At this time, do we have any public comment? No? You want on with the clicker? Thank you so much. All right, we're going to work through budget workshop number 4. So we're going to review our budget parameters and expectations. We're going to talk about our budget priorities. We are going to go through in 3 different groups of budget activity. The intent of this activity is just to really dive into how our budget is structured so that our trustees representing the community have really a full understanding of the different components of budget. We're going to talk about historical financial trends, our budget challenges we anticipate ahead. We'll have a review of our preliminary 25-26 budget. We will show our budget savings recommendations, and then we'll talk about upcoming dates on the horizon. So I want to review for you our budget parameters, which our trustees put together. First is a balanced budget focused on strategic priorities. That's that top parameter there. Provide several recommendations and be able to explain justifications for these with the board. Equity of resources across all campuses. Acknowledge the real raw emotion of these decisions, but ground each decision in logic. Avoid negative impact to core instructional staff, and maintain community transparency and create the stakeholder survey. And once articulated, that stakeholder survey came in the form of a staff survey asking for feedback. The board budget priorities as we move forward are competitive salaries across the board, maintain class size in elementary, CTE certifications would remain provided that programs are fully utilized, extracurriculars remain assuming programs are fully utilized, and that we would do a staffing study of existing programs, and that we would pursue any opportunity for teacher compensation increase. Before we get into this activity, I just want to share just for full context with the board. And it's unfortunate that public school districts like Georgetown ISD are having to have these kind of conversations. But we're going to talk to you today about when we finally get to recommendations for reductions. Over the last 2 years, it's been a total nearly just over $7.2 million in cost savings or reductions. But it is easy to see that from the state of Texas, with what is being daylit as possible bills that may pass, none of it will solve the long-term financial needs of the school district. But I do want to thank the Board of Trustees for the guidance you have given us. You represent the community, and you give us those parameters and priorities to help guide our work. And it has been really helpful to give us those guardrails. And as we go through today, being the voice of the community, I just want to continue to encourage you to ask the questions and give us feedback to ensure that as we make these unenviable decisions, that we are aligned to what is in the best interest of the community and the school district. So, Jennifer, am I handing it to you next?
Yes, and we also have Mr. Andrew Kim that we'd like to introduce.
Yeah. Are you going to introduce him? Okay.
So, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Andrew Kim. He's been working with the board, and he's going to work with us today with a tool that he has created that will help show the interactions of the different components of the budget. And so I will let you explain that a little bit further.
Sure. You got it?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I just appreciate you guys inviting me to this great place. This is a wonderful architecture, and from the outside, it looks like a very historic, obviously it is, but inside very modern. It kind of shows you the fact that all of you guys are interested in not only innovation, but also keeping with honoring the past. And I think that's very important to this school district for a long, long time. I've been certainly a fan of this school district from afar, and to be here actually kind of helping them along this process is a kind of a little feather in my cap. As you remember from a board workshop number 3 that we just recently had, there was a discussion among the board about having an opportunity for the board to have a generative discussion about topics. And what better topic than the budget? And obviously by the showcase of the folks who are here, it's a very important one, very critical one. It's been said to me oftentimes that innovation or student performance, you can see whether or not you're really serious about that based upon what the budget says. But your budget is your evidence of your direction that you want to go to. So one of the things that you have to do as a board is to come together. Unfortunately, in the government world, you can only come together by law, talk to one another in this kind of circumstance, in this setting. And to have this generic discussion without perhaps some of the, folks kind of, chiming in, it's very difficult to do. So why not have an activity for you to go ahead and understand some of the ideas and concepts that you want to explore that we discussed at the last workshop. And that's all here that Dr. Padwell just went through. You wanted major levels of discussion on priorities. What matters? You wanted to discuss about CTE programs. You want to talk about competitive salaries in relationship to other school districts nearby that you're competing against. You want to talk about the programs that you certainly want to go and preserve for our students, but at the same time, how can we make it more efficient going forward? So these are the things that you've discussed about. So how are we going to do that? But the most important thing that you want to discuss was a notion of transparency. You didn't want things to be hidden away. You wanted it to be open process to actually discuss that. So you're going to get a chance to do so here today for the next 5 hours. Actually, now it's only 20 or 30 minutes or so, and that'll be it. You're going to get facilitated by great individuals. So Jennifer's going to facilitate Team A. Renatia's going to go Team B right here, let's just call it that. And Dr. Petal is going to go ahead and facilitate Team C in a few minutes. What you have is a template, a budget activity. It gives each board members an opportunity to understand how the budget actually works. How does one segment of the budget affects the other? Because they're all interrelated to one another. One of the most important things that Jennifer's going to go over in a few minutes, it's what's known as assumptions on the current law, the very top portion of this template. These assumptions is what drives your revenue dollars for the school district. And you are probably one of the largest employing districts or employing corporations in this area, if not the largest employer. As a result of that, there is a operation, a corporation-like work that you have to think about. One of the big things that you got to come across is the notion of the attendance factor. In the state of Texas, attendance drives everything. Prior to COVID, a lot of school districts were driving about 95.5% of attendance. We haven't really gotten to that point yet. Every percent has a certain dollar value that comes from the school district. And so you're going to see how important those things are. You're going to understand your taxes, your ADA, or average daily attendance, how important that is as well, too. You may have 20,000 kids, but on a daily basis, you may only have 13,000 kids. Because they're at, I don't know, Disney World, cruises, you name it. Doctor's appointments, and so forth and so on. Who knows? So this is very important to think through concepts about these things. The rest of the template, or the activity, deals with your revenue estimates, your enrollment changes. The good thing is you are a fast-growing school district. Fast growth has an advantage. For every new student that you get, the state gives you additional dollars. So it's a very good thing. The other side of that is school districts who are losing enrollment. That's a tough place to be, very tough. And right now, many school districts are actually in that situation here today in our state. So I think in some sense, you have to be very thoughtful and blessed about the fact that you're in this growth projection going forward. But still, you get to go ahead and figure out what that means to you. You can certainly figure out what your attendance rate could be, project that out, property values, and what's known as a TRE, or a tax ramification motion. It's a bad word for right now. But what this activity will do is to give you all sorts of avenues to figure out how all these things interplay with one another. But I want to be mindful of the audience who are here today. And those who might be watching this on YouTube or Hulu or Netflix or whatever it might be. That this surely is just an activity to identify some scenarios for the board to figure out. To give you ranges of what's possible, what is not possible. Instead of talking about it from the dais, you're actually going to have an activity with your colleagues to that generative discussion, to actually work with your facilitator, who's, by the way, only charged is to give you factual information, not to influence you one way or the other. But for you to go and actually change some of these numbers to see what it does to the bottom line at the end. So at the end of the day, Team A, Team B, and Team C, you'll be given some time to try to go ahead and balance the budget. By ensuring that your revenue versus your expenditures. And all these green boxes have ranges, have a drop-down menu. And you can go ahead and put different numbers in that to affect this number at the bottom. You're basically looking at, under current law, what was last year's revenue versus what your expenditures would be. Now, for those in the audience, these numbers will change. By June 1st, you could have new numbers. You could have new projections because of the fact that each student may, if the legislature does their job, it could be actually worth more. So you could actually get additional revenue. So we want to be cognizant about that. But at the same time, those numbers or those formulas are not embedded within this because we're operating only with current law. Everybody with me so far? So your facilitator is key to figure out, hey, what can we do with this? And then you will actually talk among yourself, and actually I'm going to give you amount of time to try to go ahead and balance the budget. Whoever comes closest to that, Team A, B, and C, wins the prize. And you get to go home early. The others got to stay here and answer questions for everybody else. All right? Everybody with me so far? What's going to be very important to all of this is that Jennifer, your CFO, has been very capable working with me and Renita here. I do appreciate them quite a bit. And Dr. Padaville for this last couple of weeks, is for you to go ahead and understand the assumptions that the board is working with. Those assumptions are very important. It may not actually come to fruition in some sense, but you want to be as close as possible, right? For example, you may have an assumption that somebody in the community might say, oh, we're going to get 1,000 kids next year. Somebody might say, we're not going to get any kids next year, for various reasons. So getting together as a common assumption is very important. So why not give you an opportunity to actually figure out what those ranges could be and what it does to the bottom line. Everybody with me so far? Mm-hmm. Now the audience may see this and say, oh my gosh, are they really thinking about adding this or delimiting this and so forth and so on? Once again, for the sake of the activity, this is a modeling. This is a scenario for the board to really have a better understanding about the budget and the interrelationship with one of these variables. As a result of that, you will have better questioning later on down the road. You'll be better equipped to understand how they work together and coincide. And in some sense, you may have a lot more empathy for Jennifer and Dr. Padaville in terms of what they have to face behind the scenes trying to work this out. Any questions so far? But I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer so that she can go over some of the assumptions and I'll facilitate. All right?
Each table has a laptop, and the assumptions that we've gone over these, these are the same assumptions that we had in March. They're still preliminary, but we don't have any better information. So these assumptions have not changed from the last time we met. We're talking about a tax rate on the M&O side of 0.67 cents, the ADA 13,076. That's from the demographers. Enrollment projection of 14,060. That's a 93% attendance factor. And then our tax collection rate is 99%. We haven't changed our taxable value. It's $24.6 billion. We do have some updated information. We got kind of some preliminary numbers from Williamson County. And so we will be showing you those. We're not changing our projections yet though, because the protest season has just started. So the numbers they have will change after they go through these next couple weeks of protests.
I feel like you all know this, but when it says attendance factor of 93%, we're currently averaging, if you look at just raw attendance numbers, it's a little, somewhere over 94%. However, when you factor out pre-K, it rolls over to about somewhere north of 93%. So pre-K adjusts what actual ADA looks like.
You have to adjust it down.
Yeah.
I was gonna put in there like a line that says to generate additional revenue, selling cookie dough, but unfortunately, you gotta sell a lot of cookie dough. To generate a lot of revenue. So we put that in there. But once again, one of the things that I want to be thoughtful about the audience though is this. Team A and Team C will be working off those two laptops. You're going to have to huddle around that. Team B, you guys got lucky. Your template is going to be viewed by everybody. All right? So that's okay. So once again, for the audience, each of the board groups will be working together. At the end of the activity, I'm going to ask each board members to just have a reflective comment. What did you learn? What was your thoughts about it? And so forth and so on. All right? And that's how we'll end it and conclude. And then you'll get into the deeper issues of the budget as you progress through the budget adoption process the next few months.
And we're estimating this should take about 15 or 20 minutes.
The 0.67 tax rate, just to make sure everyone knows, we cannot adjust that. We have a formula that's given to us by the state, and we just calculate that out. So that's why it's removed from our options. The only way to adjust our tax rate locally would be through the TRE, which is the bottom line.
That's correct. And so when we start working on this activity, if we wanted to see what 1 penny can give us, there's, you'll have a drop down to do that. We're also at the same time that we have to come over here and adjust this recapture by 1 penny
because we're increasing it. And then the TRE has to be voted, and it's not something we could enact this year, even if we use it in this model, correct?
That's correct.
We could start the process of talking about it. There's a checklist of timelines and deadlines that we would need to do, but we couldn't do it for this year.
You could do it for next year,
Correct.
essentially, but that's more tactical. But I think that's probably something we can talk about later on down the road.
Right, we can look at the impacts today,
Yeah.
but even if we tried to utilize that to balance the budget, it's not really an option for us this year.
No.
Okay.
Technically, you can, because it's the November election you have to go for, so it's retroactive, that situation.
Okay.
Very difficult. You have to declare that election by August the 14th coming up. So that's after you adopt a budget. So you essentially adopt 2 budgets.
One with and one without.
That's right.
Okay.
That's how you would do it, technically.
And we would need to do some other things as well,
You do.
an efficiency audit,
Yeah.
there's things we need to find.
Right. So realistically, that would be something that's future looking.
That's what we can.
I think it's very thoughtful to just, I know there are taxpayers out there who are more conscientious about their values and tax notes. So, obviously this is something you have to sort of broker and discuss for a while. But once again, I think for the activity, we wanted you to see what that does.
For sure.
What is the additional revenue as a result of what a voter-approved tax ratification election does to your school district?
Yeah, I asked just because we've had discussion with community members who've already brought it up themselves, saying, why don't we just increase?
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but yes. And so it's nice to see it here because it'll help answer that question a little bit.
Yeah, this is really the first time that we've discussed this.
Are we ready to dive into the activity?
So, any other technical questions about this? And I'm going to come around and facilitate. Now, when I used to teach 5th grade Dallas ISD, I evaluated a good class by good noise. So I expect some good noise coming out of your tables, okay? So it's okay if you want to be a little bit talkative and so forth. So I have 3:25 on the watch. So I'm going to give you about 20 minutes to get going with that. That be okay with everybody? 20 minutes. All right, you guys go ahead. Thank you.
TRE, and that's it.
Just so that you
So this is just to show how it will affect for certain variables going in.
I think you and I kind of already have a really good understanding of how this works, but I think there, from Dr. Haver's discussion across different community members on the board, I think there's there's a big misunderstanding of what our limitations inside the
Yeah,
salary.
how many variables are we actually inside? Yeah.
Did you do 9 up at the top as well? Is that still showing?
Should have updated, but I don't think it did. Because I should have just solved our budget problems.
Yeah. Well, we're getting 11.9 million.
We're giving up 6. Actually closed it.
Yeah, 8.4 instead. It's still red, but it's positive. It was negative.
Not changing it at all.
I mean, if you go all the way back up and change what you change that to the, don't have any changes from previous. Is that the negative 3.7?
So the update's here at 168. Go on the laptop there.
Well,
That's the 168.
I think what it
Oh, it just didn't
it's
turn it
changing
black.
the
It just took the
def-
parentheses, but it left
deficit.
it red and messed me up.
Right, I know.
It gave us $18.
But I mean,
I got
it
it.
should be coded to if it's red, it's negative.
Right. That's what messed me up. But its parentheses is negative. So really, we just got to put a big old tax rate on the red.
That's what you're supposed to do.
And honestly, maybe there's, I mean, I told you I had a member mention that would be something.
You guys okay so far?
Yeah, I've had a few.
James has already solved our issue.
We just increased the tax rate. We're good to go.
9 pennies for all 9.
I heard we get to go home early.
Yeah, you got, did you also
Yeah.
with the recapture number to 9? Penny is different weight. So that's the issue.
Yeah, so even at 3 cents, it puts you at $1.5 million surplus.
Yeah, it's a 3 cents.
You guys solve the issue?
I was just curious how many pennies it was going to take because somebody asked me, what's that going to look
I
like?
know.
And I was like, well, I really don't know how many. So it's kind of cool to be able to give them an answer.
Yeah, there's that enrollment change too,
That would be something interesting to be able to share with how many pennies would it take to get,
Yeah, so 2 is going to be just negative, so it's really 2.5.
yeah, to get us to the black.
So that's kind of interesting to know.
Yeah,
Not that we necessarily want them, but when people hear 2.5, they may be willing to support it, actually.
yeah, and I don't know quite yet what the INS rate is going to do, but if we were able to go under that, we could get a little traction for that.
So assuming we don't want to increase the tax rate. So the enrollment change is based off our current projection, but a conservative version of our.
Yeah, there is a drop down if you want to
Oh, yeah.
2.5 cent.
Check for it.
2.5 cent tax raise, and we got this covered.
Okay, super. Let's do it. Just get the voters to sign off on it.
The problem is that's still not a compensation raise or anything else, so it's just getting you back to.
But if you did want to see this, 167 is the demographer's projection, and I feel like it's not. I mean, we're going with that. He used to be on the high side, but I feel like he's done a better job.
He's missed a couple, yeah. What is the retention payment? That's for people who stay.
Well, yeah, if you do the drop down, like say we wanted to give everybody, I think it starts with $250.
Just for staying.
Yeah, or just, yeah,
Like,
instead
yeah,
of
so
a
we would do
raise.
that. If
Did you go up your TRE by 2 cents?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2.5 cents.
Okay, he went up by 2.5.
Why stop at 140 grand short? Look, it's like gas. $1.89.99 is not $1.90.
It's not 3 cents, it's 2.5 cents. So I thought that was kind of interesting. interesting one?
Yeah.
Is it?
So the 3%, if you want to give a 3% raise, it's costing us $3.3 million.
Yeah.
What's the tax recommendation of our
Versus $1,000 on 2. And this retention number is assuming all employees or just all teaching positions?
I think so. So it'd be 250. What did it come out to say?
For what?
Like if it's 250, if we did it
If
one
it's a
time.
if it's a one-time 1,000, it's $2 million.
Okay, so then yeah, so we have about 2,000.
2,041 employees.
Yeah.
Is it why would we do a retention payment instead of just increase compensation?
Well, that's what I was looking at. Like,
Yeah, why would it be different line
let's say
items?
we're just saying if we couldn't do, like, let's say we can't, because the retention payment could be a one-time thing. We come up with a little bit of a surplus this year, but we're not sure of next year or the year after. Then we can do a retention payment this year that could change next year, or we could pull back. If we could do
Reduced compensation. Put the number in.
Elizabeth is concerned there's no negative marks or compensation on it.
No, it didn't change the deficit on ours, so tap.
What is it?
The TRE.
It does, it just stays coded red for some reason.
Yeah.
It gets red in parentheses. It does actually work.
Yeah, he's looking at it.
Well, and there's another
There's a
tab.
TRE at the bottom. Those tell the TRE at the bottom. When you adjust the top, it reduces the deficit. When you adjust the bottom,
Oh, it doesn't increase it back?
it didn't increase it back, yeah. There's a formula missing. But you can hand do other communities.
The numbers are not, for some reason,
Yeah, something's squirrely, we're going up.
you guys,
They are for us.
Let me double
Try a
check.
different tab, maybe?
Our numbers are going weird.
Is it the numbers or the people?
Well, we just increased the attendance rate.
We're on
We
group
brought
two.
it down, but then we tried
So if we
to
go
also
2 cents.
add
Oh, they're
in
right, 'cause it's
kids.
saying-
It went up by $1 million.
When you increase the attendance.
Total recapture is 18 million.
Yeah, it went down to
And your
712,000.
total recap should never
If
adjust.
we had a 95.
Because your recap is just.
Yeah, we what, 95?
That's no recapture. It should really be just all of it.
But I think it's maybe just changing the deficit.
Yeah.
I don't think it's even changing that.
Very small.
When you change- The top does, but the right, this bottom, it's still at 147.
So that's maybe.
But I think if you just, if we just update
They
it,
didn't like the
it's not that number this
What was
year.
the name of the guy in the
If
front
you just
row?
tie that in,
Oh, Mr. McMillan.
Yes.
I texted like a month ago.
so now we're still at $2 million.
He's the one that said
We should do it here.
we should do it together. Where is he?
Okay.
I mean, I adjusted the formula on ours and it's,
Very local and hard.
so now we're at 3, that's 5
I knew
million.
the name sounded familiar.
Very anti-Texas, which I nearly fell out of my chair.
When he said
Give
it,
about
yeah.
2.5 basically. 2.8, so ours is working now. So 2.5 cents is really not, it's gonna be like 5 cents to get the,
Yeah, that's just not, like, that's a rabbit hole to even chase down.
it's not even feasible. But it's good to know, like when people ask, why don't we just tax more?
No, it's going
Even
up
if
the
they're willing to
other
pay
way.
it, it's good for
It
them.
doesn't make that big of an impact.
Because we give so much back to the state from recapture.
That, to me, is why disruption isn't really
Right, you gotta
a viable
increase
option, because we're taking more from our taxpayers to give more to the
That's right,
state.
it's basically
And there's-
50% of it goes straight to the state.
Yeah.
So it would take 5 cents if we tried to do it that way.
Okay, so this is great. This shows that our chance to generate more revenue is incredibly limited. So can we, like, not waste any more time on that and
Yeah.
focus on reducing expenditures, since increasing revenues is not really within our ability to control?
Yeah.
Okay, this is where we're not getting.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting there yet with this. I think
No. What I'm saying is
Where are we now?
what he's not giving us is this.
Have you not seen that list of,
What? Which one? I mean, I see what he's selling us again today.
I was curious about how a TRE.
now it depends,
And I know this is the next part of the workshop that we're going through.
zero staff changes or anything of that nature, zero on all of those?
yeah, everything's zeroed right now, everything's
Is
back.
that what you're thinking about? No retention payments, because we did build in some ranges for So you kind of see what it does.
Yeah, I messed with those just to see
Okay,
what the difference in cost was, but
So were you working with him from that one page long list to kind of identify which of those were most palatable, or is this his recommendation to us as to what's most palatable?
this is their recommendation of what's most palatable inside the framework we gave them. There are other things that would require changing, like elementary school,
I
class
just,
level.
if there's a way that we can get that
Much better.
known a little bit better, that we went from this one-page list, single space, to this.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
And the work that was put in, so that it's not just we're getting, because if you just look at it this way, we're getting spoon-fed what we need to cut. But there's actually been a lot more room to
77 up.
how we
But
go
to
from
determine what
the list of
should-
50 things to now 20 things.
And part of the conversation has to be, what do we really have a stomach for removing? Like, do we-
And that's why there were other things on that list that we're not even, they're not even recommending to us. So we really have put some thought into.
So all those things we zeroed out, I can ask Pato before we wrap up to share some of the things that we had put back in, the things that we basically zeroed out after all this one-on-one meeting.
That it's not just that they picked and chose what it is they're telling us to cut because ooh, nice magic number at the end. But there really was a lot of teeth gnashing over some other things that were considered for cuts too.
Career integrity that just don't understand.
I guess they are, because we're getting revenue there.
The only one that's a revenue generator is this.
Still do it.
An actual reduction. Yeah, you're right. We basically cut out all the,
Other things we
and the
considered.
transparency piece of what we're trying to do, we're not being very transparent about. Okay, yeah, we can definitely tie that into discussion, or if we can't get that today, we can bring that back into the workshop. Because we're gonna discuss budget again at the actual, or the board meeting. And so we can have a quick information to share that with, hey, here's the things that were presented to the board that
Went
we,
from this
Right.
to this, and there was really a lot of intentionality. And what was not palatable.
Out of the original.
Sorry, I'm kind of jumping to the end. I skipped this whole part.
You guys, I do think this is interesting. I mean, even for me, I've never seen it presented like this.
it is really interesting.
It really, I mean, it definitely brings home the point that there's very little we can control to increase revenue, and that's why our focus has to be on cutting expenses. Because we just, our hands are completely tied in how we can generate revenue without selling cookie dough. Yeah.
So, yeah, what Elizabeth was saying is this is great today, like people are gonna see the cuts and who's making them by department. But what we did is we had this first one, we zeroed out, and we said, no, we really need to keep those. And we've taken that work away from the transparency piece of what we're doing.
Because I don't want to just cut to the chase and just say, oh, this is what the district said to cut. No, there's a lot of work
A lot of conversation.
narrowing down these
And
recommendations.
so either today we can highlight the fact that that existed and we can bring that back at the board meeting as like an information item.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was going to mention that basically, we had been, collaborating, meeting with staff for feedback, and then these
And so maybe we discuss it today and then have a board meeting. Yeah, we can have information there. And that way they can see, yeah, we considered these other things that we want to eliminate. When we narrowed it down to this list, and this list was done, instead of a workshop.
$1 a day.
Principal meetings and outside experts.
Okay, explain the 200 enrollment. That's new, 200 guys.
Are we giving up something that we need to have a stomach for is small?
But remember when we
Deficit budget to keep? Sounds like we are discussing.
that's why it's a one something. However, if we got
We could, I was smashing on recruiting too because I was so angry about
Because it looks like it had a little baby. He's not a smushy. Or somebody like took one, opened it up, sucked on it, shrank it down, and stuck it back into this package. But this guy,
These numbers that you're living by right now is today's.
man, and that's the only one left like this. Yeah, somebody slipped a ruby in that. See how it's open?
Not good, it's not good.
What would a 2% do?
And so maybe today we discussed if there's a tolerance to have a deficit for any of those, while mentioning that this we asked, if would you be comfortable if we asked you to present kind of some of the things that we reviewed, we put back into the budget?
Because we knew we couldn't come in cutting those things.
40%.
I think if we asked for it today,
Yeah,
he's
so
not
then,
going to say anything.
you're right.
We just want to make sure you're ready. Yeah.
But what
Not
I'm
put you on the spot.
Yeah. Those things that we discussed that we zeroed, there were zeros on the last version I saw, we zeroed out some things to get to where we're at. But there are a lot of things that we put in and said, no, we really can't cut that, and took out, and so maybe we can just present, here's a list of all the things we considered. Yeah, and these, so today we'll go through the recommendations, what we narrowed down to. I think we're gonna have a discussion where we'll take a smaller deficit.
We don't know how every month.
Bring this piece back because well, and because we're talking about our goals are to not impact, and that one, I feel like of all of them,
The demographer.
directly should impact.
What I will say is,
All right, guys, let me bring you guys back. I'll give you like 30 seconds to finish up the last clause.
but I like that discussion.
Yeah, well, I know again, it's not a decision today, but it's a good.
So once again, I'm just going to reiterate that the activity is for you to model possibilities as well as consequences. I think it's important for the board because you do have a very tough decision on any given year, but maybe perhaps more so now than ever before. The resources are somewhat dwindling. State school finance is a very tough challenge. And a lot of people don't necessarily understand how the budget necessarily works. It's a very complicated situation. And in some sense, having to actually go through this hopefully will give you a sense of understanding about your possible ranges of thoughts and thinking, to ask better questions of your staff and think about what is the best things that you need to take care of for the school district. So with that in mind, I hope that you enjoyed it, but I do want to go around and have each one of you just talk about what lessons you're carrying forward so that you are going to be certainly a better contributor as a board member to the overall process. And what are some of the questions and thoughts you might have? And what are some things that surprise you perhaps? So some of those things. Would anyone like to start? I'm going to start with Team A because they were just
You want to tell them?
going. So let's start over there.
No control.
We come around this way.
We are the 18. Always the 18.
Where were your number?
He redefined our roles early on.
Oh, that's right, because we're actually number 2, so we change the
Yeah.
letters and the roles. Well, I mean, this is, I think, just a really good exercise in showing how little control we have over increasing revenue. And so it helps us focus, when we're looking at a balanced budget, focus our efforts on reducing expenditures because increasing revenues, just our hands are tied.
Yeah, and I think the tax ratification, the TRE would be 5 cents just to get us to break even, and
But even half of that then goes back to the state, and that's gonna be very hard sell to our taxpayers. Give us more money so that we can keep part of it.
Yeah.
so that the rest can go to the general fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of the state.
Yeah, as you know, in the state of Texas, there was a constitutional amendment that there's not a statewide property tax rate.
Right.
So in essence, what it does though is the school districts are the mechanism by which there is a property tax rate. So the state actually takes a portion of your rate as you go up. And
But they
that's how
also dictate what that rate can be
Right.
and the formula to calculate it,
Yeah.
and they do it in 3 different places, and none of those match,
Yeah.
and then somewhere at the end of it, we get told what that number was. Yeah.
Was there anything that surprised you from y'all's table about the budget and how the numbers in there play with one another?
Honestly, just that tax, if we did the TRE, how much we'd have to increase the tax rate just to get a not
Yeah.
significant amount of money.
Yeah. There are school districts who went all the way up to the top, And there are school districts going up only about 4 or 5 pennies. So you have variations out there. But as Jennifer mentioned, Dr. Pevelo mentioned, the process of getting a TRA to the table for the voters to consider is an arduous process. It's not that you couldn't do it right now, or you have to move really fast. But that's something to think about. All right, anything else?
I think so. I think the rest of it, I think we're pretty comfortable with.
Okay, all right. May I ask, how close were you guys to balancing the budget, or did you balance the budget?
I mean, yeah, we
I mean,
played.
playing with the numbers, we were able to balance it, but they weren't really stomach,
We're-
we
yeah.
couldn't stomach some of the things we were doing, so.
Okay, all right. That's good, that's honesty. Okay, that's good. All right, I'm gonna go to team B here. Who would you like to start?
I'll start.
Great, thank you.
All right. I think one of the big things for us when we make the change to go into 95% for attendance, right? I mean, I feel like the district has worked really hard to get to the 93%. And I don't know what it would take to get back to 95, which was a pretty typical attendance, right, for school districts. And I'm not sure what that would take, but it would make a significant difference in money-wise.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a big aha. It was wonderful having to being able to figure what would a 1% raise look like, what was a 2% raise look like.
What was the 1% changeover on that number? Was it $2 million?
It was $2 million for a 2% change.
Yeah, so one
Call it 1 for 1.
One for one.
What does our attendance look like factoring out pre-K? Like, if she wants us at 95 on this, what do we really have to be at?
We'd be talking about 96.
So essentially what we're asking is 96% to get to your number.
And it's an average daily attendance for the entire year.
Mhm.
The way it works is that the state settles up prior year and future years, what at the end of the year. And you know, unfortunately, after spring break, the numbers decline, and this is true of all school districts. So you really have to put some emphasis right around the month of April, which we're on right now, and then May. This is where you lose. You start out strong, because everybody's excited.
Mhm.
So what you're saying is when we do our next calendar, no days off till April. I like this.
There are states that do April spring break, and then it's a miserable attendance rates. South Carolina is one of them, by the way. But I'm glad you noticed that, though, because that is one driver, right? Attendance rate.
Yes.
Great point.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to comment about the budget and the inner workings of the relationship of the numbers?
Well, it was just interesting to watch when you could change one number and it would make a significant difference, you know, because we looked at the tax rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will tell you my experience. I've had board members tell me, well, why don't we just reduce certain activities? And if we did that, then we will solve our budget problems, right? Or it used to be comments like, if we only increase our, concession prices, perhaps that will go ahead and reduce the budget. But you know, when you're looking for answers, it's very few. And this activity sometimes shows you that it's really minimal impact when it comes to that situation when you consider that. Remember, all budgets run about 85 to 87% is personnel.
Right.
And then with property insurance going up, anticipation of going up, so there are mandatory things you have to do. Pay your electric bills. You gotta pay for property insurance, which is gonna go up, probably double-digit numbers, percentage-wise. So those are the things you just can't control. So you have a very small discretionary dollars to operate from. And that's just the way it is. Any other questions?
I think also, looking at one of the charts that we got on the enrollment,
Yeah,
knowing what, being really close to that projected enrollment for the next school year
yeah.
is, I didn't realize how important that is. And so you look at this and some other things, particularly when you're in the building process that
Yeah.
we're in right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Great point, great point. And as a fast-growing school district, your reputation counts a lot.
Yes.
Remember, parents are shopping for schools.
Mhm.
So as a result of that, it has a big effect.
Yes.
Now, I do want to introduce a concept to you. Now, 167 or more, if you were to kind of work with that, you got to remember that's not the density of growth in one area. That 167 is spread all the way through. That becomes a problem. So even you should drill down and look at where our imbalances are in terms of growth and non-growth. Does that make sense there?
Yes.
And that becomes an issue and discussion points as well too about that. All right, great. Okay, anything else? Jen, you good?
No, I'm good, thank you.
I'm up there with the attendance rate, knowing that we used to be at 95%, and I think we can get there again, even 96%. And I know poor Dr. Patterville's heard me talk about this, and Heather, about the neighborhood conference committee, and I think we
I heard about that.
would, yes, exactly, because it worked. So why did we have a 95, 96% attendance rate? Because we had the NCC that was wrapping around the families and developing plans to get those chronic absentee kids in the building. So I can see training up our truant officers to possibly be part of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that alone, the attendance rate, it really raised the money significantly. Then, of course, the TRE,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, we balanced it, but
Well, so both teams balance the budget, that's good, all right, that's what you wanted to do. Yes, sir.
By exception. With those three elements, the TRE, the attendance, and enrollment, as soon as we gave a raise, and it wasn't even our ideal raise,
Right.
it was only 2%,
Yeah, it's gone.
the money was gone.
Yeah.
And we're
Right.
back where we started. And we're still gonna get mobbed for only giving a 2% raise.
Yeah. And you gotta always think about that 2%, whatever you give in terms of compensation carries over, right? It's a reoccurring cost.
Yeah,
So
true.
you gotta think
Well,
about
it multiplies, right, because they want it every year.
So
And they
you gotta
deserve it
think-
every
They
year.
did it every
They
year.
earn it every year, yeah.
There's not a question, I think, in this room, and certainly from y'all, that teachers should get an increase every year, right? The question becomes, how do you make that work with the rest of the budget?
Well, yeah, and is it
That's-
sustainable, which at this point, the way we're funded by the state, it's not sustainable to do that.
Like I said, if we can sell enough cookie doughs, I've tried to calculate how many cookie doughs we can sell to make that work. It's a very difficult task to make that work. But other thoughts?
I think in just plain language, if the community members understood that directly their child being in school affects money going to the district that the district uses to pay the staff,
Sure.
I'm not sure that people collectively understand that in very plain language.
Oh, yeah.
When you keep your child home just because it affects money that's going to teachers' pockets and our ability to pay them more, I'm not sure that people quite.
Well, I mean, not only that, but I'm sure you would agree, and I know you would agree, because we talked about this, is the fact that we need kids in our schools to learn and advance, but it has a huge financial impact as well, too. So-
Whereas Dr. Padova was telling me, I believe you said Texas is one of only 6 states that does attendance this way. So it's not a yearly attendance, and I'm not sure that in all the talks, people simply quite grasp that.
It's a very difficult thing, and once again, the general public sometimes just have a very difficult time understanding school funding. It's very difficult, complex issues.
I mean, I have a problem understanding.
Well, and hopefully you got a little bit more
Yeah.
in depth as a result of this
Yeah.
activity.
It's a process.
Good. Anything else right here? Okay, very good thoughts. All right, Team C.
I just wanted to tag off of what Anthony said there. I think it's the community understanding the attendance and then the community actually also understanding, like, recapturing how that works. Because a lot of the comment is, I pay my property taxes, how come the district doesn't have enough money? So I think understanding how recapture works and what percentage goes back to the state, and a combination of that would help the community understand why it's so important to get their kid to school.
I know. It's a very difficult task, and I think one of the things you saw that when you have valuation growth increase, it doesn't do anything on your revenue side. That valuation growth of your property wealth only affects on your debt side, or what's known as the INS tax rate. Because the state really controls how much money you get per child by that rate of the M&O tax rate, and that's it. And to your point, but it does affect your recapture. So the poster child for this is Austin Independent School District, right? If you were here 20 years ago, there was no skyscrapers there. Now there's all these skyscrapers, right? That creates a huge value for that school district, but not enough kids. As a result of that, Austin IC sent over $900 million back to the state. Right? That's how it works. But it's affecting now smaller districts out in West Texas who have gotten huge property increase because of the oil wealth, the oil and gas fields. The Permian Basin, their property values increase. But they have like 400 kids. So they're recaptured school district just as well.
I felt like I read that Austin ISD was significantly at like 60,000, like $60 million under budget.
They're about
97.
$90 million.
Yeah.
And they said-
Yeah, so, and they do have a TRE, they have a TRE, they passed a TRE a few years back. So, yeah, was it last year? Okay. So, property wealth, this came about earnestly back in years ago to equalize property poor school districts and property well school districts. The idea was a good idea, but now it's gotten to a point where it's like, wait a minute, how's this gonna work? So, to your point, the TRE is your only major sort of pathway to getting additional revenue that's pretty significant in that regard. What are the thoughts?
Well, we were also talking about communication with parents for attendance to increase it. If we tell people that we're taking attendance at 10:30 a.m., send your doctor's appointments at 3 p.m.
Yeah, honestly.
That's what I did, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Also incentivize attendance, you know, hey, perfect attendance, come to,
I gotta tell you, it's the
Millville,
orthodontists. You gotta get together with the orthodontists.
yes,
Get
yes.
a ski creek, get a free
Yeah.
beer.
It's
Free beer
9
to
a.m.,
parents.
do adjustments. Stop.
Hey, I read books because I got a free little pizza as a kid. So, there are incentive programs.
Right.
But yeah, we think we can get it up to 94.5% with communication and incentives.
Did you guys balance the budget, or how'd you guys
We're
work?
still 230,000 below, but that's with 1% teacher increase and help with insurance. The sad part for us is to realize how little each teacher gets
Yes.
and how big that total number is. And that's what I hope you understand is, you know, it costs $1.25 million to give each teacher $250.
And this template does not do justice, but a 2%, even a 3% divided by 12 months for a teacher, minus the taxes, is really not that much. Right? It's not even, doesn't even make up the inflationary loss that the teachers had like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible situation in that regard. But once again, as a board, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers. And this is, you're in a tough spot to operate under these circumstances. But one of the things I hope that you got out of this activity is to kind of see the ranges. To kind of give you a better understanding about what better questions could I ask, what better communication. I think what I'm hearing is better communication out to the public. And I think Dr. Padaville obviously has that charge and he's doing a great job, but you have a responsibility to help support that, to communicate the situation out to the public in that regard. All right? Okay, any other thoughts over there?
No, we tried to solve the deficit first.
Okay. Well, because you guys are honest, you guys lost though, because you had, so these two teams, they balanced the budget, so you guys win, so you guys get to go home. You two have a good stand.
Y'all tried to be realistic.
Share with
Hey,
y'all.
we're winning the hearts and minds.
Listen, I appreciate it very much, thank you for letting me in, I'm gonna turn it over back to Dr. Pettit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Kim.
Appreciate that.
So we have a little bit more information to share, so we'll just move on. We thought we'd like to just show a little bit of some historical documents. This actually is from the Williamson Central Tribal District, showing back from 2019 to what they're projecting for next year, 2025, tax year. And it's got two graphs. The peach is basically the total market value of the properties in the district, and then the blue is the taxable value. So what you can see is in 2021, we had a huge increase in market value, but because residential homesteads are capped at 10%, you're seeing just a small stair step increase each year. So I just thought that was interesting to know, and also to know that there still is a very large amount of market value that in the years to come, we will continue to have those stair steps because of that 10% cap. We also are seeing more commercial, so that's another reason for this increase. We have not changed our budget assumption yet because I think we talked about it earlier. This this $26.3 billion number does not have any protests, or appraisal protests yet, so that's gonna come down from there. And then also, like Mr. Kim said, this really affects us more on the debt service side, on the interest and sinking side, than it does on M&O. Because of the formula on M&O, regardless of really where we are here, we'll get that same amount per student. Whereas on the INS side, in order to pay our principal and our interest on the debt, we set our tax rate based on that.
So, a question I want to ask is, so if the revenue goes up if the property value goes up for 2025 greater than we expected, it helps us on interest and sinking. So we have arguably a better capacity to pay down bond debt, to build bond capacity. But on the maintenance and operations side, in terms of the revenue we're collecting the local property taxes, does it increase anything on M&O that would change any of these numbers here?
It will change the tax rate because TEA will compress the tax rate because the appraisal value is higher. We won't know till August what that tax rate will be. But we're already assuming a certain tax decrease that we know from the formulas, but I think we'll see more.
So the tax rate will compress, but does any more local property taxes flow into the cut that we have in terms of local property tax revenue?
We'll probably pay less recapture, which is good for the taxpayer because that means they're not paying more taxes. So we should be paying less in recapture when the tax rate goes down. So this again is also from 2019 up through this 2024. And it's just showing kind of our historical, the black is our fund balance, the green are our revenues, the red is the expenditures, and then that blue line that's going through it is just basically showing our enrollment. So, you can see back in 2019, pre-COVID, we were doing okay. We had more revenues than we did expenditures, but things kind of started to change since COVID. We weren't able to almost balance the budget when we were break even last year. So I think that shows that we've been working really hard to get that fund balance up. But you can see how low it had been kind of during those COVID years. So we're trying to kind of get back where it needs to be. So this is really just for information.
Can I ask a question, Jennifer? Why, I don't remember, why in 2023 is the revenues and expenditures so much higher than the other years? I don't
So
remember.
that's a very good question. That's because we paid a large amount of recapture. That was before the tax compression. So we paid $49 million of recapture that year.
So that's in the expenditure, so the revenue side,
It's in the revenue side as well.
because the revenue side was high that
Right,
year.
yeah.
Okay.
The way we account for recapture is an expenditure.
How much of it is recapture?
So Jennifer, I think,
Sorry, after you.
I was gonna say, I think this would be useful if you broke down on the expenditures, what were actual district expenditures versus what was recaptured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what Ms. Malden, in case no one else picked it up, what Ms. Malden pointed out was, what's not being shown in here is on the revenue and expenditure side, recapture is not taken out. It's included in there because it's an expense we pay every single year.
Because, yeah, you're right, that the 2023 seems really high. What was going on that year?
I don't remember all of that.
Mhm. But that's because the recapture was that much bigger, yeah.
Okay, so now we're here to talk about what we're facing and our budget challenges ahead. The legislative session is working, they're producing, but it's still, the outcome is unknown. We'll talk a little bit about the big hospital too, that really affects us a bit. We are working to align our expenditures with the revenues. We've spent time today discussing that. We know that competitive compensation is one of our highest board priorities. We are facing rising health insurance costs, just like everyone else in the United States. We made cuts last year. We are arguably understaffed already. Doing more with less. We have to maintain a healthy fund balance for the sustainability of the district financially. We are growing, so we're opening 3 new schools in the next 3 years, in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And we have seen a little bit of slowing enrollment from what we had been seeing the last couple of years due to the economy and interest rates.
Yeah, we're still growing, but just not at the rate that was anticipated 3 or 4 years ago.
So these are the same assumptions we talked about last month, and we talked about them earlier today as well. But just to kind of highlight the 25-26 year assumptions, which is this right-hand column. The demographer's report is showing 14,060 for enrollment. That is a 1.2% increase from this current year. If we use the 93%, which is the adjusted pre-K attendance rate, that gives us 13,076. So that's what we've been using for our ADA. So that's what we are getting funded on. Our preliminary certified values, we're showing a 7% increase, so that'd be about 24.6 million. Not sure yet where their Williamson County is at about 26 billion, so we're going to be somewhere in between there. We typically have a 99% property tax collection rate. The basic allotment that we're using for our projections is still 6,160 because we'll talk a little bit about the increase that they're talking about if it were to pass, but for now we're using current law. And then the tax rate is 0.6682. That is a slight decrease. That's a slight decrease, but that's what we're projecting. I think it's going to go even lower, but we won't know that for a couple months. INS tax rate stays the same at 0.3575, so that's a tax rate of 1.0257. That's the assumption that we're using for this. So, again, this is our preliminary budget. That top line, 168.3, that's our projected revenues for the district. Right off the top, we're going to send 18.3 million back to the state of that. We are using current year expenses. We are in the process of consolidating budgets, but we don't have them completed yet. So we're using the current year's budget of $151 million for, this is starting for our expenditures. We know due to the growth, particularly at the elementary and the high school level, we're looking at $2.2 million for additional personnel. We have not put anything in the budget to increase compensation yet, or as an employer district insurance contribution. There's no increase factored in. We do know we're going to have increases in our property insurance or utilities, so we factored in inflation of $517,000. So that's $172 million in our expenditures. So the difference between what we're projecting for our revenues coming in and our expenditures, that's giving us a projected deficit of $3.7 million. And as we get more information, at the end of April, we'll have property values. Maybe we'll know something from the legislature. So as we move forward with more information, these numbers could change. We also have been working as a district on recommendations that we are bringing to you as a way to balance the budget and close that deficit. We have been meeting and collaborating with our district leadership team, with our principals. We've discussed many different options to reduce our deficit, and these are what, based on the feedback from our stakeholder groups, that we're bringing as recommendations for the budget to save, to help make the They're listed out here. We're looking at 6 district level positions. That's a total of 322,000. We're looking at eliminating travel stipends, that's 38,000. Department budgets, we're looking at reducing them. You may recall, we got a pretty large reduction last year, so this will be their second year of a very large reduction. So we're really asking them to cut.
Is this the, Jennifer, was that the 10% per campus reduction number right there?
No, this is 5% for departments, and then on the next slide, you're gonna see what it looked like for campuses. I do wanna point out, campuses are being asked to reduce by 10% on their overall budget. This year, departments are being asked to reduce by 5%. But the reason for that is we've had consecutive years of asking departments to reduce their budget, and this is the first time in a couple of years we've asked campuses to reduce their overall budget.
When you define budget, the departments, are we talking, what departments are we?
We're talking about departments at the district level, everything from athletics to fine arts to teaching and learning to technology to the superintendent's office. Every department's being asked for a minimum of 5%.
Thank you.
We're looking at changing our model for our mental health staffing, and we expect a savings of 78,000 with that. We are looking to fund a portion of the cafeteria staff, child nutrition. We have some employees that spend part of their day working in the cafeteria, custodial, and so we can, the time and effort that they spend in the cafeteria, we can recode over to child nutrition, which is a totally separate fund, and it's a self-sustaining fund, so that is something you can do. And then we're talking about reducing contract days, the number of days for our LDCs and our facilitators. That would yield a $97,000.
So when we talk about child nutrition fund, I just want to articulate this because not a lot of people know. We basically, for the purposes of this conversation, I want you to think about 3 different sources of local property or revenue. We have maintenance and operations, we have INS that pays off school bond debt, and then we have this child nutrition fund. And child nutrition can't be used for anything else, and they typically run a surplus. And so a lot of times at the end of the year, if we see a school needs new cafeteria tables, you can purchase that out of that child nutrition fund. But there's actually a function that allows us to pay partial payroll if those individuals are involved in cafeteria service out of that child nutrition fund. We had been paying them out of the maintenance and operation fund, and it's totally legal for us to apply those funds to those individuals. Before we move on, do you have any questions about these before we talk about campus? We're going to move on to campus.
So we're talking about reducing the administrative assistant at each high school. That would be $180,000. Increasing our high school class size to 26 to 1. It's currently at 25 to 1. That would be $240,000. Reduce campus budgets. That's that 10% we were talking about. So that's $150,000. We're talking about revising how we deliver UT services to our students. That's a savings of $330,000. Reducing the LVCs and APs based on campus size. So we have a staffing funding formula, and so we would use that. Reduce elementary paraprofessionals, that's $275,000. And then receptionists, again, based on our staffing formula, that would be $170,000. And reducing interventionists would be a savings of $240,000.
And who are the paraprofessionals?
The elementary, is that PE?
Yeah, those would be PE paraprofessionals. So to be specific, it's at schools with a size under 650 students. The paraprofessionals that are in PE class would be reduced.
So what does that make the teacher-pupil ratio in those classes, for PE classes? If it's been a teacher and a paraprofessional,
Yeah,
what is it going to, what's it gonna end up being?
Well,
for the students?
there's no doubt it's going to be larger, but what we've asked our elementary principals to do is to think about specials rotations so that the class size is manageable for those PE teachers.
So,
No, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah.
We have
So
that
are we
discussion.
talking about, I mean, because that's hard to do. That is, that's hard to do, to make that special schedule work. And to not have 50 to 100 kids in the gym at that particular period of time. So that's why my question is, what would be the proposed number of students that would be the responsibility of that one PE teacher?
I don't have that exact number for you, and I don't know if Lindsay or Amanda or Heather want to chime in and have specific numbers to share with you. But I will tell you, not just elementary paraprofessionals, everything in this process is asking people to do more with less support in there. So what we're doing at this point is and I appreciate the question, because what you're doing is you're giving us feedback to really understand what does this ratio look like.
Right.
But, you know, the analogy I've used is we're, in this budget reduction process, we are cutting to the bone. But then we have to go back and look at where are the strategic adds needed, campus by campus, in order to make the work manageable. So that's an answer that we owe you.
Okay, so I guess my question is this the appropriate time to ask specific questions with regard to the recommendations that are up here? Because
100%. Sonia wanted to add something on
I
elementary.
did want to add to your question. One of the ways that principals are looking at that is to add the library time into the specials rotation so that they can break that group up into smaller groups and not have to have so many students go to PE without the paraprofessional there. So that's one of the ways that we're working with the campuses and the principals are working to solve that problem.
what would be helpful to me would be to see what that scheme would look like. So, you know, what we're talking about here, to say, what does that look like if we do this? Really factually, before we look at that direction. Other question I have is revised delivery of GT services. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is across our campuses, instead of every school having one GT teacher, we're reducing to about half. And so I'm going to ask Sonia to kind of share the work that's taken place so far and talk about what that looks
Absolutely.
like.
So in some of the planning for that work, we're trying to cluster campuses that have a higher number of GT students with campuses that have a smaller number of GT students, and then we'll assign those GT teachers to those campuses. So it's more of a hybrid model where they would get direct services from the GT teacher, and then classroom teachers can provide the enrichment portion of the GT services. And within our curriculum writing and professional development plan, we're making sure that teachers have the training that they need if they're not already certified. Many of our teachers are GT certified, and we're looking to make sure the ones that aren't get the professional development that they need. We're adding office hours so that the GT teachers will have an opportunity to work directly with district staff to get the support that they may need if they have questions. We're looking within the curriculum and planning out our curriculum writing this summer to ensure that we have, if we're asking the teachers to be involved in enrichment activities, making sure that that is embedded in the curriculum. So those are the steps that we're trying to take to mitigate some of these things being possible.
I guess my biggest concern is we have such high expectations of those regular classroom teachers. And so when you reduce the amount of services that you're going to provide for the GT, then the responsibility is going to shift to the regular classroom teacher, who is already responsible for also making sure those kids get intervention that need intervention, then the general population, and then we're adding GT. So the range that a classroom teacher would be, it just increases a load that is already incredibly high that we've talked about.
Yes, ma'am. It is a concern for us.
It is a huge concern.
Which
This is
which
good
piece is
feedback.
more
This
time
is
consuming?
What a workshop's
Pardon me?
supposed to look like, so I appreciate,
Which-
let's have more conversation
Yeah.
from the board.
Which piece is more time consuming for the teachers? Doing the intervention work or doing the GT enrichment work?
I think one of the things that we're thinking about and framing, I'm thinking around is a multi-tier system of support. Within a multi-tier system of support, we support students whether they need intervention or enrichment.
Right.
That system is the same. If they're advanced and they need additional, that's where the enrichment and advancement comes in. If they're performing below, that's where the other intervention piece comes in. So it's the same system, but the way our system works now, they were getting that from that.
Interventionist
direct
or
teacher,
from
the
GT,
teacher.
right?
And we're trying to make it a hybrid. So that, yes, they'll get opportunities to work with a GT teacher. Every campus will have that. But there are gonna be times where the classroom teacher would have to provide that enrichment.
So this is forcing you guys to pull slightly from both ends of that model and basically dump that on our teachers is what Jen's saying. Or ask them to do more, which essentially means we're dumping it on our teachers because we're asking you guys to balance the budget and asking you guys to pull these supports away from them. Okay.
Not only is that different, it's also coupled with the bottom item, which is a reduction of interventions.
And how many interventionists are 240,000?
It's 4.
4. So how many does that leave? And are they then responsible for reading and for math?
Yes, on several of our campuses, they have 3 interventionists. Those campuses will go to 2 interventionists.
Okay, so they will each have at least 2.
They will still have 2 interventionists.
But some campuses have 1.
Yes, and those that only, and they still have 1. They'll still have just 1.
And I just want to remind the board, like, they're doing this in response to us telling them we expect a balanced budget. And then we gave them framework to work inside of. And so there are a lot of things that they have pushed back that, and Elizabeth brought up the concern earlier at our table. And I talked to Jennifer a little bit about it, is there was a lot of things considered to be removed from the budget that they have fought back in by being strategic about putting these things to try to align it to what we told them to do. And so I'm gonna ask Dr. Padaville and Jennifer if maybe at the next actual board meeting in the information session, they'll actually bring in kind of a list of some of those items that we considered removal, but we're determined to keep over some of these projects. And then the other thing I challenge the board to do is when you leave today, it's not gonna be solved today, but when you leave today, if there are things that give you heartburn because we said we expected a balanced budget, but you're willing to take a $500,000 deficit into the next year and the year after that and the foreseeable future, because we're not counting on the state at this point, that discussion is something we can pick up between now and the next with Jennifer and with Dr. Padaville to kind of help ease that.
This right here is a pretty critical conversation, because we look at these, when I look at these budget parameters and expectations, which, you know, as our principals have come together, as the district leaders have come together, we have balanced budget focused on strategic priorities. And there was a key piece in here about avoiding the negative impact to core instructional staff. So arguably we got there, but if the feedback from the board is we don't want to address these items that reduce the budget deficit by $500,000, and you want us to find $500,000 somewhere else, then that is feedback I need to take to heart, and I need to come back to our team and say, let's find $500,000 somewhere else.
Well, I think it's maybe that, but I'm sensing there may be tolerance for a slight deficit because we feel like you guys are, to use your phrase, cutting to the bone at this point with a lot of stuff. We know how much hard work went into it, and just listening to the explanation of consideration to try to juggle some of this stuff is exhausting, honestly. So I'm just trying to gauge, is there temperament to maybe have a slight deficit budget because we know there's not a lot left to reduce?
Yes, sir, that's the right question to ask, because there's not an action item attached to this. The board approves the budget, the bottom line, and you're giving us feedback on how close to that bottom line do you want us to get, and you're also giving us real-time feedback on what do you want us to protect as we work through this. So, yeah, please carry on.
No, because this was a priority, avoid negative academic impact to core instructional staff.
If this is what we
And I
have,
don't feel like,
maybe it's okay.
I
No,
feel
I
like
need to know now,
there is a negative impact.
because they're not gonna have time to rework
And I
that
don't know
between
how,
now
I don't
and
know
when
how
someone
to,
speaks
but
up
if
the
that's
next
one of our
workshop.
parameters. And I think it's important that we know clearly what we're doing. What's the impact? Before we walk into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trustees, do you have any other feedback before we continue with the conversation?
No, just that I see some items that there are some adjustments made based on previous conversations, which I appreciate. I know that you guys are working incredibly hard.
Yeah, we had individual conversations with each trustee, which is allowable. We just can't have conversations with like, four or more. And one of the previous iterations of what this looked like, based upon feedback from our district leadership team, is we talked about no GT teachers across the district. And so we adjusted to a little over half, or just about half, in order to have some sort of structure around GT services and a dedicated GT staff. So this was a move in that direction, because really we could have been talking about over a $4 million savings.
With a significant impact to student performance.
Yes.
Thank you.
One other thing I want to point out across here, and one of the things we're talking about is what does appropriate staffing based upon the academic need of each school look like? And with our interventionists, to some degree paraprofessionals, to some degree LDCs, there was variance across our schools. So trying to find like what does appropriate staffing look like across our district that isn't dependent on individual conversations and individual requests for additional staff is something that we wanted to move towards as well. There are also additional savings on here. We looked at having athletic staffing adjustments, savings of $120,000. Really appreciate our athletic staff and some of the changes that they're really talking about implementing there that would really help high schools in particular keep class size reasonable. We would reduce random drug testing. We spend about $15,000 a year on random drug testing. We'd lower that amount by $10,000. We generate revenue via CTE coding changes, and we would have a revised residential placement model in special education for a savings of $197,000. When you look at the total, notwithstanding the conversation that we just had, in district level impact, it's about 32%. It's $1.2 million there. Campus level impact is 48%. So you're looking at $1.8 million. Athletics has seen a 3% impact. CTE has seen an 11% impact. And special education has seen a 6% impact there. Through that change in program, that one line that I pointed out to you. So it's a total of $3.73 million in revenue generating or cost reduction there. So before we talk about possible bills on the horizon, I want to again engage the board in a conversation here about talking about those two items in particular, paraprofessionals and GT teachers. Do you have viewpoints on it that you'd like to share with during this workshop time?
I mean, I think it would be useful that, you've done a lot of work to come up with these recommendations. It's kind of what we're talking about, that behind the scenes we'd started with this very long list, and some things just really knowing what our priorities were just weren't even an option. We could have cut them, we could have saved some money, but it would not have met our expectations in aligning with the priorities. And so I really appreciate that, but now we're at these recommendations, and some of these hurt. But in order to balance the budget, which is the goal we want to achieve, now, in the hopes, because I know you're going to talk about some bills, right? We're not giving up all hope. We're not relying on the state to give us some money, but we can, by golly, not give up on hope. And if we did get some, but not all, could we go ahead and decide of those things we're thinking that they're recommending get cut, which would be the first ones to come back?
Priority add back.
Well, we've asked principals for that feedback, and then the number one priority of what would come back on the board is interventions. So they've identified that as their number one.
Okay.
In their top 3 priorities of what we asked them to identify, one of those items, or actually both of those, paraprofessionals and GT teachers did not show up on those lists from principals. Interventionists were number 1.
That's very helpful.
A big group that I don't see listed here is I don't see fine arts. Is that somewhere else?
Fine Arts is looking at budget reductions to their overall budgets. There is also one staff member in the Fine Arts Department that's being reviewed as part of these budget reductions. It showed up on when we looked at district level positions.
What's under that?
It was so much easier when we were just doing the model.
Somebody had to go make it real.
Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Hurt, any thoughts on any of those items that were discussed or anything else on the board?
When we talked one-on-one and we talked about GT, you kind of explained to me how they would move campuses, correct? Like you would have a teacher, like now go to different campuses.
That's correct. So we have, let me give you an example. We have some schools, like one school in particular, this number stands out to me. Their total GT students they have there are 18, like 1/8. And then there's another campus, their total GT students there is in the 20s. And so the idea that a GT teacher could share between those campuses based upon the program evaluation made sense for us. If we have to consider doing a budget reduction. And, there's a neighboring district that there is not a GT teacher per campus. There's another neighboring district where there is a GT teacher per campus. There's no state requirement on providing a teacher. So do we feel like the GT program is incredibly important to us? Absolutely. But I could say the same thing about athletics, about fine arts, about class size. And so this was one when we looked at program evaluation, we saw an opportunity for cost savings out of all of the ugly opportunities in front of us.
No, that explanation helps. I don't want to use the word soften, but it's not going away. Y'all just evaluated it on a bigger scale and how you still make it work with less staff that you have.
You want to highlight Hospital 2?
So we did talk about House Bill 2, it was introduced pretty early on in the legislative session. There has been an update. Last week, they did vote, the Public Education House Committee voted an amendment to $6,555. So that is now a $395 increase to the basic allotment. And if we just use, very basic math, we take that gain, which is $395, $15,076.88 that we're projecting for next year. That's a 5.1 million gain. So that is good news. However, it's not going to help us eliminate the deficit because we would be using 40% of that for compensation, which is approximately $2 plus million, which we would happily do. But it's not going to help us reduce the deficit or eliminate the deficit. So.
That 40% is basically a 2% increase to pay across the board.
And 75% of the 40%
Has to go to classroom
goes to
teachers.
So it's positive, but it's not enough. So we just kind of put some of the upcoming key dates. We're going to talk next week with DLT about budget, where we came to today and where we're going to go. Our next board budget workshop is May 5th. So we are planning on doing hopefully updated numbers for budget. We also plan to talk about compensation and health insurance, and where we are on health insurance. And then June 16th is the day that we have the regular June board meeting to approve the budget.
And June is ideal for the end of our time. We can push it to July if we needed to. No,
What's-
June is it.
June.
Oh, the budget adoption?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
June.
because July 1 is the start of
Our fiscal year.
And we need to have an approved budget in order for us to make expenditures. And so we would have to have it approved in June.
No kicking the can down the road any further.
All right, so as we wrap up, I just want to ensure that I'm reading the room correctly here. Everything in terms of budget reductions seem to come across relatively clearly. However, the board has expressed concerns about the way GT programming would add to overall teacher workload. And the board has also just wants an explanation on elementary paraprofessionals and what that rotation and what those class sizes would look like. Is that fair? Is this summarization?
With the life raft around interventionalists, it.
Oh,
some
and
of the hospitals.
interventionals. Sure.
Interventionalists.
And the board also understands that if we, that as we look at those things, if there are any questions about it and we go a different direction on either, that means that we adopt a deficit budget, or I asked the team to come back
Find
together
somewhere
and we look for $700,000 somewhere else.
And then at the next board meeting, are you comfortable kind of putting the information item together? Just shows, we don't have to go into detail, like dollar detail or anything, but programs and things that were considered along the way, just to kind of add transparency to the process. We ended up with a list that through a lot of work, and I think that work is probably being lost just by coming to our final list. And so I think,
Say that one more time, sir.
so like all those everything we zeroed out and said, no, we need to keep, if we could share what some of those programs that were considered, because if we don't get state funding and we don't get the help that public schools need, those items that we save now are gonna be items that we may not be able to save in the future.
That's correct.
And so I think it's important the community knows now what we were able to scrape and save by sacrificing these items we're talking about versus potentially if the state legislature can't get to a good point for us, what we're talking about in the future. I don't wanna be sitting here next year talking about, now we need to cut these things because the state didn't do X, Y, and Z, when we knew those things were potential now. I'd rather have that conversation now, and if people get mad and actually go engage their state legislature, great. And so that list of things, librarians and all those things that we've discussed, if we can just share what some of those touch points were.
So, one thing I want to share with you is as I informed the board last week and to some degree this weekend, out of, for a lack of better ways to explain it, out of a sense of compassion, I've asked our campus leaders to start having conversations with individuals whose position may likely or will likely be impacted. And so part of this is, we can always come to a place where the revenue's in a better place and we add back, kind of like we've communicated this whole time. But, something I just have to articulate is there are some decisions that have to be communicated in a relatively timely manner. And then we can always talk about adding them back.
Yeah.
But I just want to share that with the board because it is April. And we're going to be moving into, we're something like 30 days left in the school year. And so the need to communicate that is kind of in front of us. But we still owe the board an explanation in terms of the questions and the feedback that you gave us.
And I don't think we're looking for additional things, but I just want the community to understand there were a lot of things considered before we got to this list. And to have access to what that is, so they understand, once we cut these, we can't cut these again next year, they're already gone. And so there's gonna be a next step if the state doesn't fix the funding model.
That's correct.
I just like to end the day with joy, that's all.
any additional questions or clarifications, this concludes the board meeting.